Hi, this is same old Tony Mitra. Today is the 8th of Jan 2021, and in today's rant I'll talk about two posts from two different women, both Americans, that I want to take an issue with. The first one is from a woman I know for many years, Anne Murphy. She used to live northeast and now she lives in Florida. I knew her for many years, going back to the times when I was battling the government of Canada regarding glyphosate or toxicity in North American food system, which is at the root of many evils that's happening here in my view and in the view of many others. That's how I made many friends. One of them was Anne Murphy. She copied this text on social media. She read it somewhere else. She doesn't know who originated it. But here is that comment, and it all has to do with the goings on in USA right now. But it has deeper roots, which I wanted to brush upon. This is what she copied. The Second American Revolution began on the morning of January 7, 2021 at 3:14 a.m. when the tyrants in Washington, D.C. installed one of their own as president against the will of the people. They have betrayed this nation and its people for the last time. We take our lives, our property, our freedom, our rights as citizens of the United States for this fight for our republic. From now on, the former Republic of the United States can be known as the American Empire. We no longer have a representative government of the people by the people. We are ruled by tyrants who have appointed themselves as corrupt theatrical elections by post-national corporations and post-national global entities such as the UN. We, the former citizens of the Republic of the United States, do hereby declare ourselves to be in a state of revolution against the tyrants who have usurped our rightful place as the sole electors of our representatives. We do not want to have a war, but we will fight. This was the text by Anne Murphy, who she copied it from somewhere else. It essentially mentions something that I have wondered about for quite some time, and much before this current events in Washington, D.C., much before the election in November in USA. But yeah, I have wondered whether US, anyway, I made a post recently on social media that the goings on makes me think that the American identity, society, and nation is probably slowly disintegrating. The things that are going on is unbelievable without taking any particular side. And I personally think that the divide between one kind of people and another is now getting so deep and so vast that maybe one half of America will refuse to live under the same roof with the other half. You have a clause in divorce called irreconcilable differences. When one party didn't necessarily beat up the other party or physically abuse or something, but their differences are so great that they cannot live under the same roof anymore, and that's reason enough to grant a divorce. So I wondered whether the society was heading for a split, and I also wondered that if the society was to disintegrate, whether it would along with it, it'll take half the world down. Those other nations that are economically, militarily, or culturally linked with the United States. I have pondered it for a while, and it's not necessarily to do with the current election and its repercussions, but going back quite some time, the way USA was changing, or the way I learned to identify a particular civilizational traits, which is not just American but also half the world that is influenced by the American system. So that's one I think is important to mention. I will be harping on these in the next few days of my ideas, why I think the society is, the nation as we knew it, is disintegrating. The other comment is even more penetrating. I did send a New Year's greeting to some scientists that I am closely associated with about research on glyphosate and how its toxicity affects health and our immune system and our microbiome and their contribution to our health and well-being, and the evolutionary symbiosis of these microorganisms, single cell microorganisms that made multicellular life like ourselves possible, and so on. So one of them, and when I send them the message of a New Year's greeting, I did say that what's going on in USA makes me wonder. It looks like the identity and way of life and nation and the era, the empire of America is slowly disintegrating, and that it will likely take half the world with it by the time the dust settles. Anyway, this is how I feel. How do you feel? Happy New Year and good wishes. So Stephanie Seneff actually answered my email, pretty lengthy, reasonably lengthy answer. She has been one of my heroes for researching the issues of glyphosate for a long time. She was influenced by a speech by Professor Don Huber many years ago, drawing the attention of the scientific community towards this intriguing herbicide called glyphosate, which was marketed under the brand name of Roundup by Monsanto. And I came to know her well. I learned a lot of things from her, as well as her partner in many research papers, Mr. Anthony Samsel. And she wrote, this is what she wrote: I agree with you, Tony. I am, however, hopeful. Today I am practically ecstatic. May have something to do with the fact that I am putting the finishing touches on my book on glyphosate. I really hope it will make an impact in 2021. I think the US is crashing because our government has failed us, and I think the main problem is a failure to protect the citizenry from toxic chemicals. This effect of toxic chemicals on our biology, on our thinking, on our future, on our economy, the total effect of this avalanche of toxicity has not yet been properly analyzed or talked about anybody, whether this is one of the root causes where we know our autistic children numbers are increasing. Anyway, going back to her email response. Of course, the ever increasing gap between the rich and the poor is a powerful force to stir up resentment among the masses. Both the Black Lives Matter quote unquote constituency and the increasingly disenfranchised white blue collar workers who represent the other half of the fight of the increasingly impoverished population against itself. This is to me a very profound statement. She is identifying that the Black Lives Matter constituency, which I suppose means the colored people, the people who are not white, who feel disenfranchised, who feel that the cream is being taken off by the white people who have lorded over them and what you call exploited them for a long time, along with sections of the white people that agree with them, and they would like to change the society accordingly to make it more equitable. That's one group. The other group are the white, blue collar, low income factory workers and rural people, farmers and so on, that are also disenfranchised greatly, whose lifestyle and whose economy, whose wealth has fallen drastically, and they also feel the system is failing them. But interestingly, these two groups are fighting each other instead of the oppressor. It's the first person that clearly identifies the two warring groups both being victims of a system, but they're being manipulated to fight each other. This tactic is known as divide and rule. It was practiced by the British during the colonization of, for instance, India, where there are many small kingdoms, and they would come and set one against the other, and then gain friendship with one of them, bolster them militarily and many other ways, and then help the guy to win over the other guy. And when that king wins, he actually doesn't increase his power, he ends up increasing the power of the British Empire. So this divide and rule policy is something that Stephanie here is mentioning. I read on. As the gap between the rich and the poor continues to accelerate, and the population becomes sicker and sicker due to toxic environmental exposure, the evidence of severe censorship of vital information becomes even more apparent. We know we are under the regime of extreme severe censorship at all levels. Academia, scientific research, social media, everywhere. You cannot speak the truth. If it is that version of the truth that is not supported by this cabal, then that's censored. It is inevitable that this country will face a meltdown of unimaginable proportions. But hope there will be a silver lining whereby we can rebuild the country from the grassroots, from the bottom up, into something far more vital and inspiring than what we have now. Future generations will look back on these times in shock and disbelief that we could have gone so far astray. That was Stephanie Seneff. She's not a politician, she's not an activist, she's a scientist, she's a research scientist, cutting edge research scientist who has a background in computer science as well as biology. And it was she who, along with Anthony Samsel, taught me how glyphosate interferes with our biology, how it gets misincorporated into our protein constructs, how in certain segments of our newly made proteins by our body, where glyphosate has gone in, like the Trojan horse, makes those proteins malfunctioning or rogue, and how it can trigger a cascading series of new diseases that did not exist before. I mean, she has been an eye-opener for me. I have gone around India recently talking about glyphosate, and I have borrowed information from people like Stephanie Seneff and Anthony Samsel and so on. And this is what she wrote, and I think she nailed it in the sense that the so-called, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, whatever, the so-called democratic supported groups that seem to be one side of the equation, battling the so-called whites who have exploited them, but actually they're battling the blue-collar disenfranchised group of white people who have also been greatly impoverished from different levels. The blacks were very poor, and they continue, and these ones were a little better off, and they have also been driven down at the same level, and that's happening from somewhere on top. And both of them are made to fight each other instead of look up and recognize the real enemy. This, I have not heard anybody else describe it quite that succinctly. yeah, I agree with what she is saying, and I have a different perspective of judging USA. I did not come to this realization that the nation was disintegrating just because of what happened in the last few days in Capitol in Washington D.C. or what happened on the day of the election or subsequent to the election. No, I came to this realization not even when COVID or pandemic or the lockdowns and all that were. No, I came to this realization little by little for the last 20 years, and I have had quite a few talks with all kinds of experts to get to their point of view. And I come to realize that by and large, most of them kind of agree that this collapse was coming. Most of them did not agree that it would come very soon. Most of them told me I need not worry, it would not happen in my lifetime, but they were all wrong. I also realized that I have a very unique point of view, and I will be talking about it in future. I might even decide to write about it in a book or something. I realize that I have a very unique point of view, perspective. That's because of the way I grew up and background of my life. It is very, very unique, and that might be partly responsible for my viewpoint. Other part is my genes. I grew up in India under a Hindu family, but I was very unlike the vast majority of Indians or Hindus. I didn't grow up as a very religious person. I would probably be called a maverick or a disbeliever, or not exactly disbeliever, but somebody who criticizes too much and too many things. I didn't grow up with any Hindu deity in my home. Every home, religious homes, have something or the other. If you are Christian, you have something to do with cross or maybe image of a Christ or a what do you call a Christmas tree or something or the other. Most Hindu families have images of some god or the other. Most other families have something, some symbols and all that. But I had nothing. I grew. Our house had nothing. That doesn't mean they didn't believe in. They were what you call atheist or something. Not necessarily, but they had a peculiar idea, influenced by where I grew up, is that spirituality comes higher than religion, and you don't have to, believe in the gospel of one specific faith in order to have a belief in the ultimate good of having a spiritual mind. I don't know how to explain it, but I grew up under that. I grew up to question things. Although I was in a very small, semi-rural place in India, which is where I grew up, I didn't grow up in a city, but I was dirt poor, but I did manage to get the best of education in India and around the world. I was not, of parents that were multimillionaires. They were dirt poor. It's not that they were uneducated. My father was a professor of fine arts in a university, and my mother was also college graduate and spent her time in social reform of the disenfranchised Indian women folk just after independence. And she also did quite a lot of groundbreaking work in bringing up the you can say tortured or exploited women folk of rural India, and she has left behind her mark quite a bit. So I came from reasonably good families, but I was dirt poor. I went through school barefoot, without shoes, and yet I ended up being a marine engineer coming out of Bombay, and then I had further education in Norway and UK and all that. I had the best of jobs everywhere. I never had to apply for a job, believe it or not. Jobs came my way throughout my life. I migrated not because I wanted to migrate, because somebody wanted to help me come to their country and work for them and all that. I didn't work in India proper, but I did work in Hong Kong for many years, and then Miami, Florida, and then in Canada. And I visited almost all countries in the world, and not just as a tourist, but actually for work, for assignments. I spent months at a time in places like Hamburg in Germany, or many other, almost all countries in Europe and Russia and China and Singapore and South America. I mean, there's very few countries I've not been and actually worked with people, not just as a tourist. So I have a different perspective. I realize that my view of an USA is coming from a different perspective. I'm very different from an average Indian that came after growing up and doing some studies in India, came to USA. They have a very narrow view of both the country they came from and the country they came to. I have come to realize it now, and sorry. So anyway, I have a very unique perspective, and I have come to realize that the American civilization was imploding because it was top heavy, it was unsustainable, but the root of it goes way back. What is surprising is that it would start unraveling in my lifetime. Most people said whatever would happen long after I was gone, but now it's happening now. And these two women, Anne Murphy and Stephanie Seneff, has identified two aspects of it which to me are actually aligned, and perhaps it's not circumstantial that both these messages came from women. I have a different view of women's capacity to introspect and come up on analyzing a situation compared to the men folk. I know that Hinduism is full of deity, most powerful forces in its mythology, most powerful entities that battle the evil for the good and so on. Many of them have been women, and I don't see quite a similar parallel in, say, Christianity or Buddhism or Islam, or I don't know much about Judaism. I suspect the women folk are not quite shown that way as they are in Hinduism, and the reason for that, again, in my view, and I'm not a proper Hindu, so to speak, is because Hinduism is not based on a single instance of a prophet coming to the earth and establishing a book or a gospel and then kick-starting the system from there. But it's a amalgamation of layers and layers and layers of older mythology, older beliefs, and then newer ones and newer ones and newer ones. It's a compilation of the growing faith systems of the world, going back to hunter-gatherer and pagan days all the way till today. This is what makes Hinduism different in some ways than almost all other established religions, but it makes it very similar to many pagan systems that even exist today. So that is probably where the root of the feminine force comes from. It's from our pagan systems, not the established religious system where men have been perhaps elevated, if I may put it that way, above the women. Anyhow, all this is my talk about two women, Anne Murphy and Stephanie Seneff, who gave two different perspectives of what is going on and why I believe that the civilization we know as American, the age of the American civilization, is coming to an end, and it has very little to do with what happened on the 6th of January in Capitol or in the election day in November, but it was something that was bound to happen in one way or another for a long time, because we have a top-heavy system that is absolutely unsustainable. I'll talk about more of this unsustainability and all that on another day. I've already talked enough. How do you like it? This is Tony Mitra, 8th of January, over and out.